many of the young marketers who came in directly went into do marketing. Do and do quickly. They did not get an opportunity to, like some of us who were groomed in a previous generation, to actually sit down and understand how to think and then do marketing. And so the think or the strategic underpinning of marketing strategy, things like why do people buy, things like how do you craft brands, things like how do you go to market, somehow they're there in the conversation, but they're not necessarily resting on a solid, if you like, foundation of essential marketing principles. So because I used to keep on getting asked this question, somewhere in my mind this germ came, maybe we can write about these things. The second trigger is when I was doing an occasional column for Business Standard. And, I used to write about marketing in Business Standard. And the editor of the Business Standard brand world page, Arundhati Dasgupta, who's since moved on, she said, Bharat, there's a book in you. And when she got me talking to Penguin, the Penguin folks, the wonderful folks at Penguin Random House India, also felt the same way. So the coming together of these two triggers, one is these questions that I used to find myself answering to young marketeers. And the second, this interest that people showed in my ability to perhaps present these ideas. When these two things came together, 9 Timeless Nuggets was born, first as a concept, then as the process of writing, and here 18 months later, we're in launch.
Beautiful, Bharat. Clearly, there is a book in you, and you're right. We are too busy doing, and sometimes the doing needs to be preceded by the right kind of thinking and the right basis for that action. So clearly, your book in some way lays them out, the 9 nuggets. I want to ask you, how have been the last 8 months for you, both personally and professionally? And we'll come to the 9 nuggets and talk about each one of them so that our viewers and our readers benefit from it. But tell us, how have you lived your life in the last 8 months?
So the last 8 months have been a very, very challenging time, not just for me personally, not just for my family, not just for our country, but for the entire world, as you know. It's been a very, very challenging time in many different ways. I don't want to go into all the health and other issues because those are well documented. But from a professional point of view, one of the things that I discovered was I actually had a return to some of the skills that I used to use when I was overseas. So when I was based in London, a lot of the interactions I used to have with people were through media, like through a video call or through a phone line. But in India, everything was face-to-face. Like we used to spend a lot of time in a room with each other discussing issues. And all of a sudden that got taken away, and we got back in a place where we were using technology to interact with each other. Of course, now the technology was more widespread and cheaper because you didn't have to pay for it. But nevertheless, we were once again interacting from a distance. I think what that has brought back in my mind and has taught me or retaught me in the time that in the recent last 8 or 9 months has been that the extent of preparation that we do for calls, the extent of, rehearsal that we do before we present an idea has gone up tremendously. And I find that in my consulting work, in which I'm in frequent contact with my clients, I spend a lot more time preparing something that we can look at well over a video call, so that we can focus on the issues a little bit more. So preparation has been one of the things that certainly has ramped up when we've had to go, in this format of engagement. Of course, the economic challenges that our country faces now are well documented. They are considerable, and there's a lot to be done to bring our country back to the high levels that we all aspire to. So one of the things that I feel is important as we negotiate these times is to actually go back to the basics on how brands can actually help businesses. What's happened is customers, who are fundamental to any business. Without a customer, there is no business. Customers find themselves in a situation where they can either not afford many things that they were buying, or if they can afford them, they're going to have to think carefully before they buy those things. And therefore, there needs to be a re-expression of essential value propositions from brands so that brands can reconnect to customers in this new framework in which customers are doing their decision making and buying. For me personally, it has been there have been some upsides as well. My whole family is in one place now. Otherwise, the modern families scattered the world. It's been nice to have the family place. However, all of us are operating from different rooms, doing our work from different rooms. So sometimes I jokingly refer to our house as one of those shared office space buildings where we only see each other at lunchtime and dinner time. But that having been said, just coming back to your original point or question, it has been a difficult time for all of us, but it has also been a time of new learning, of understanding some core values and friendships a little bit better, and of renewal, both personal and at a larger sort of, systemic level.
And clearly, you also spent time writing the book and making sure it becomes a reality. Or possibly it was in the works before that, but during this time it got accelerated and kind of went to print. So now let me focus on the book again. Why don't you take us through the 9 nuggets and give us a sense of each of those?
Yes. With your permission, Annurag, what I'll do is I'll just take you through the 3 sections of the book rather than each of the 9 nuggets, because there's a sort of overall idea about how the book is structured. So, when you write any book on marketing, there's such a wide territory that you can cover, right? Marketing is a vast space, and that space has amorphous boundaries. Those boundaries keep expanding. So it's a question of which view you take of that space and what you choose to write about as a writer. In fact, there has been quite a few marketing books that have been recently written. And I actually welcome that all those books are being written, because when different authors take different views of the space, the collective understanding of the space increases. With my book, what I thought I'd do is, first of all, to my earlier point, I thought I'd focus on essential principles. And I thought that in these 9 nuggets, I would focus on 3 essential principles. Absolute basic principles. One is people. Second is brand. And third is making connections between people and brand. So let's start with the first section of the book, which is how to think of people. In my 36 years on the road in marketing, when I think of a model that helps me understand why people buy, there are a few models that we've seen here and there in recent time, or the beginnings of models, but you actually go back to post-World War II, 1952, Maslow's hierarchy of needs for one comprehensive model that tries to help you understand how people manage their needs. I just intuitively, when one hears this, one says, yes, of course, Maslow's hierarchy has its role. Of course, it helps you in understanding people, but does it help you understand how people buy? And I realized that actually there is no model that helps you understand why people do the things they do. Why do people buy? And I thought that there was room in all the literature on marketing that is being written for a new model of customer motivation. And so I invented one, or I won't say invented, but I distilled everything I'd learned into a model, which is my customer motivation model. And that forms the centerpiece of the first section, how to think of people. But leading up to that, I write in the first chapter of the book, which is the first nugget, I trace how India's customer has evolved since independence. You see, from time immemorial, we felt that India had one single customer identity. In fact, in marketing, very often, you're asked to reduce your target audience to a single description of a single person with a single motivation or a single need that the brand satisfied. This is simply not true of present-day people and present-day marketing. In today's times, we are multi-personality, multi-motivation people. There are lots of things that we are doing or thinking or wanting to fulfill at the same time in us. So when you think of people, they are multi-motivated, and my model tries to capture all those multiple motivations. I'll touch upon it just a little bit more because I run the risk of, you're running the risk of asking a man passionate about his subject to talk at length about
And
something.
Bharat, just as much that excites everyone to buy the book, and not give away the full book.
Not give away everything, yeah. So the model is structured around the motivators that drive us internally, that is when we are doing things for ourselves, and the motivators that drive us externally when we're doing things because we want something from somebody else. So there are inward directed and external directed motivators in the model, and then there are certain regulators of the model. So that's part one of the book, how to think of people. Part two of the book is how to craft your brand, in which again I trace the history of brands, how we've got to where we have, and I propose a new model of brand based on the understanding from how to think of people. If people are multi-motivational, how can brands be unidimensional? Brands themselves have to become multi-dimensional because multi-motivated customers will evaluate brands in a multiple of ways. If I am a customer who values ecology or good for planet at a very high level, I will evaluate your brand differently from a person who just wants performance. And therefore, the second section of my book, How to Craft Your Brand, focuses on this idea of a brand which has many facets. I call it the brand octagon. It has a core, and then it has 8 sides together which represent the brand. So that's one aspect of the second section. The second aspect of the second section is about brand authenticity. What has happened in recent times is the equation, the balance of power between customer and brand has shifted in favor of customer. Historically, brands could put out information about themselves largely unchallenged. Today, customers examine you very closely on everything you say. And if they even smell artifice or fakery, they can indict you very savagely in the court of public opinion, which is social media. So, brand authenticity is absolutely key. And the second portion of my book, the second section, speaks about this as well. The final section, how to go to market, I don't focus on sales and distribution, which are of course very important. I more focus on the aspect of how to make connections with customers. And there I propose a couple of models on how to create brand connection, as well as how to orchestrate a relationship with customers where you go from customers getting into your brand as a dipper into becoming a desirer, a devotee, and hopefully never a detainee. Now, I'll just illustrate that last point, if you recall, because you've seen me active in the mobile space also from early contact back in 2011. Back in the old days when number portability was not available, suppose you had a number which you gave to so many places, right? You gave to government services, you gave to your bank, you gave here, you gave there. If you were not happy with your provider, you could not leave because your number was in so many places. You were one of those classic brand detainees who wanted to leave but could not go. So any brand doesn't want to have detainees. You want to have desirers and devotees. And the way you approach that is what I also refer to in the third section of my book, How to Go to Market. So that's, if you like, a broad spectrum view of the book.
And Bharat, almost every month there is at least one book on marketing, at least from an acclaimed person, from an accomplished person. Now, what makes this book special and who should read it? Of course, as I said, anybody who is wanting to build a brand, anybody who's building a business, startups, anybody who's launching a new brand. So clearly, we understand that. But if you had to define the typical reader of your book, who would that be?
So, of course, I would like everyone in marketing to read my book. But yes, it's a very good question because a book is ultimately written for a specific reader. And that for me is someone who is in the first half decade or full decade of their career, someone who might still be in business school learning marketing, who's still kind of at a place where they are really receptive to everything that's coming their way as a student, but they're not yet become a practitioner. I would certainly believe that that audience of young marketers, and I'd like to add a point to that, which is I genuinely believe that inside so many of our young marketers today is a potential marketing legend of tomorrow. India has created such wonderful marketing legends. We've had such wonderful, if you go to the past, you've had people like Shunu Sen, Ranjan Kapoor, Alec Padamsee, Shubrata Sengupta, those of us who've had the pleasure and privilege of having met and learned from people of that kind. Or in the present times, Piyush Pandey, great marketers, all started somewhere. And they could, like me, I was also able to be mentored in the workplace by wonderful guys who spend time helping me engage on topics and learning them better. In fact, I dedicated my book to all my mentors in the workplace who helped me learn things and put me on the road. But when I look at some of the younger marketers I'm talking about, they may not have access to the same mentoring. It's a faster, hurried up world. So I'm hoping that what this book will give them is a bedrock of knowledge, of principles, which they can build on, create the edifice of their brands on, and go on to become the marketing legends of tomorrow. Maybe a bit ambitious on my part, but certainly that I'm inspired by that.
I can say that I was lucky enough to meet Mr. Sen. His son is a friend, Rahul. And of course, when I started Exchange for Media, I met Mr. Padamsee. And of course, Piyush is somebody who continues to be very active and shape the destiny of many businesses and brands. So clearly, you're saying anybody who's malleable, who still has a mind that can be shaped and can apply it for his or her new launches. And, going back to the drawing board to look at a new marketplace, because same brands exist in a new marketplace. So to be able to rediscover the brand, you may want to read the book. Now, this is an era of brands being built very fast, overnight. A lot of brands that we interact with in daily life did not exist 1, 2, 3, 4 years back, or their level of engagement with us was much lesser. Let's look at Zoom. We're using Zoom to do this conversation. A year back, there were other video technologies we'd use, but we won't use Zoom. Look at what has happened to food delivery brands, whether it's a Zomato, Swiggy. So tell me, you do a lot of work with startups. What are your top 3 observations in terms of how startups are building brands? What's working for them and what they need to do better?
So there are startups of many different kinds, right? There are tech startups and there are non-tech startups as a start. But today, I think there's no startup that does not have a tech base. So let's just refer to all startups as tech startups. Let me just share a couple of observations without necessarily classifying them into what they do well and what they could do better. We'll just share some observations. One is that very often startups spend such a lot of time on product development that they leave marketing for the end of the road and kind of think that that will come in somewhere at the end when we are ready to go to market. Very often, budget-wise, the startup has spent all its money on the initial stages of its journey, and there is no money for marketing. So unless somebody comes in and gives them a vast amount of money to go massively public, then they find themselves struggling to do the marketing end of it. So I would certainly believe that what startups might do differently is to integrate the whole idea of how we're going to engage customers, how we're going to make our brand fundamental to their life stories and their life successes, how we're going to not only perform as a product, but actually elevate the customer's life in some way, such that any telling of his life story or his success story isn't complete without a mention of the brand. In fact, one of the things that people say is that a good test of how essential your brand to somebody is that they cannot tell a story about something they did or something they really needed to do without mentioning the brand. Like you mentioned Zoom in this call, that you could not have done this call without Zoom. So that is, I think, a good test of how important a brand becomes to people's lives. But another dimension of startups is that they are, in India, we have a large number of legacy businesses, and therefore we still have this terminology of digital marketing, television, print, this. We still have this segmentation of audiences, siloization, and certain old practices in how you consider this. Whereas, and to many, digital is still something that they're learning, they're still trying to find their way through it and so on, because of them being legacy businesses. I think in tech startups, that doesn't exist. There's a natural orientation towards digital marketing, which does not require a separate silo. And in fact, I make a point in the book, which is that we should go beyond even that classification of digital and TV and print and so on, and think of marketing as, or marketing communication as, broadcast and narrowcast. There are those messages that you want to give a large number of people, which are simple and easy to understand about your brand. And you could give that message through TV, through Facebook, through YouTube. You could give it through any media, but that's a
through Businessworld, through Businessworld with 55 million. Right.
Absolutely, through Businessworld, through any medium that gets you to a large number of people with a simple message. This is one-to-many marketing. And there is one-to-one marketing, which is narrowcasting, where you're talking to people through this idea of, I understand what you need. I'd like to respond to you specifically. I would like to do something for you specifically. And that could be through email. It could be through a phone call. It could be through face-to-face. It could be through any of those methods. But there are only two kinds of reaches or messages that you want to put out. Those some are broadcast, some are narrowcast. And the medium at the end of the day doesn't matter anymore. So that's sort of how I think about that issue. Yeah.
I use another term in the context of what you are talking. I call it roundcasting.
Even better.
Because at the same time, we are interacting in multiple kind of devices, multiple platforms, and it's never either or these days. Not necessarily either or. So in the context of how you describe what you described, I would say roundcasting is the way going forward. And roundcasting and simulcasting are happening in a way that it describes how audiences engage with content and mediums. Now, let me ask you another question. Bharat, again, lots of startups are very well funded. They're putting a lot of emphasis and focus on brand building because they know that adoption may happen through a blitzkrieg, huge reach out. But, staying there, as you said, you use the word devotee, to become a brand devotee and to continue to have that devotee, to have faith in the brand is a taller order. Now, tell me, if you have less budgets, there are startup brands which are very good at what they do, but they have relatively much lesser budgets than some of their competition, whether it's in the edutech space, whether it's in the food delivery space, and I can go on in the content space. What is your advice to brands and businesses that have frugal budgets?
There are certain operating principles which will operate whether you have a small budget or a large budget. And what the larger budget does is allows you to amplify excellence. It also allows you to amplify weaknesses. So if you actually get your core right, then you're amplifying excellence. And if you're not sufficiently clear about your core, then you're amplifying some negatives, right? So let me talk about that core. How do you move people from being just dippers to being desirers and devotees, right? How do you do that? Now, simply communicating to them, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, I'm great, is not going to help you. As more brands enter category, simply communicating to them, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, is not going to help you. So what is going to help you is the managing of the moments of truth. Now, moments of truth are, as we know, moments when brands and customers come so close to each other that important information is exchanged about the brand with the customer and about the customer with the brand, but more so about the brand with the customer, right? And that is when you are evaluated not just in terms of what you say, but what you do, how you behave, how you perform, what your actual delivery on the ground is. Those are the things that create brands, not just a barrage of communication or a fancy package.
Of course, what you say is important, but what you do is possibly more important.
More important. If in those moments of truth, a brand converts a moment of truth into a moment of magic, of course, the quality of perception of that brand goes very high. If you convert the moment of truth into a moment of misery, it is highly likely that a person will dip out or become a detainee. And I'd like to give you an example of each of those from my personal experience. There was a time when I was based in Dubai, and one of our clients was a division of General Motors. And it was therefore based in Southfield, Michigan. You had to fly into Detroit and then drive to Southfield to meet them when we went there once a year. It was always my chore, I put it, to go there once a year in winter because we had the meeting at the end of the year to sort of reconcile the year and so on. And because Detroit was the Northwest Airlines hub, I would fly to London and then onward to Detroit on Northwest Airlines. Now, once when I was flying back after a visit, this is what I observed while I was on the check-in queue at the Northwest Terminal in Detroit. Okay. Now, check-in is a big moment of truth in airline travel. Yeah. I was checking in here, and on the check-in aisle next to me, a gentleman was checking in. Somebody I knew, complete stranger to me. That gentleman had been bumped off his flight in the morning, made to wait the whole day. And now he was being told that the flight that they were going to put him on was going to leave after 4 hours and reach his destination through another city. The poor guy was tired, he was exhausted, and words were exchanged. Hot words were exchanged between him and the flight, so the person at the other side of the desk, the Northwestern person. Tempers rose, the Northwestern person called security, and the passenger was frog marched away from the check-in queue counter. Now, I had a perfect check-in. Nothing, everything smooth. But this happened next to me. For me, what was a potential moment of magic became a moment of misery. And I never flew Northwestern again, even at hardship to myself. Although I had not suffered anything personally. So brands, when at those moments, if they can actually do a great job, they can make a huge impact in magic. Now, that's an example of a moment of misery. A moment of magic, I'll give you an example. Same way, I used to travel a lot. From London, I used to fly to Tokyo very often on business. I used to fly Virgin. I was at a stage in my career where I did not consume alcohol on flight, so I used to have non-alcoholic drinks. And I flew on Virgin to Tokyo, and the attendant who was serving my section served me a Virgin Mary, which is my preferred drink. I flew to Tokyo, I did my business. On the way back, coincidentally, I was on the same flight attendant was serving exactly my sector. I was in the same seat in the aircraft, and the flight attendant saw me and said, "Mr. Bambawale, after takeoff, I will bring you your Virgin Mary." And when that happened, that was a moment of magic for me because she had recognized me, she had remembered my drink, and she had said to me that she's going to look after me. These are the moments when brands are created. And these are the moments when brands are lost. So if a brand can get these things right, then expanding to a larger universe of customers can work better because they would do these things consistently right with more people. And then that brand is on the road to success. If you don't do these things right, then the weaknesses will amplify. And then when you go to a mass number of customers, there could be things that leave a chink in your armor for somebody else to exploit. So I hope I've answered your question. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Bharat. Again, you worked for 36 years. As you said, 9 years in India, 18 years outside, and then back in 9 in India. Tell us, of course, in the book you talk about what's changed, but to succeed in today's post-corona world, what are the top 3 qualities that a CMO or a head of a brand needs to have, especially post-corona?
Yeah. So let me answer that question with this approach. Yeah. I think some things have not changed. What has not changed is the CMO's primary task of working with his colleagues to make a brand so attractive to people that they want to come and give you their business. That hasn't changed. You still have to make brands enormously attractive, magnetic, to make them draw people to them so that people want to give their business. What has changed is the context in which you're doing that. 2 things have changed in the context, both of which I referred to earlier, but let me refer to them again. The first is, it's not all what you want to say. People will judge you. For example, if you decide that one route to changing your brand for the current time is to go into low-grade plastic that is non-biodegradable and will lie as a tri-film plastic in the environment for a long time, I don't think customers are going to reward you for having reduced the price of your brand by using that method. So what you do will be subject to scrutiny, and you have to do things within the realms of what is right in the current environment, for the planet, for people, for everyone. So the first thing is that otherwise you will be, like I said earlier, you will be judged in the court of public opinion by customers who will talk about you in social media and point out the things that your brand isn't doing right. So that's one thing I would say that is different. The second thing that is different for CMOs is that your budgets are going to be inevitably less. Yeah. And when you have lower budgets, you have to understand what to do right, prioritize the right things, and let go of the things that were at one time good to do or affordable, and only do the things that are central to creating value for customers. So, for example, direct to customer now is a very, very good way of removing the cost of reducing the high cost of huge sales and distribution structures. The third point I would make is that if there is a way in which adversity can spur innovation, there's no better thing than that. I'd like to give an example of a brand that I've been watching, and that's the Ryan Group of Schools. They are a K-12 brand, and in fact, India's largest private K-12 brand. Now, when lockdown happened, all schools shut down, right? It was inevitable that schools will shut down, and all for the right reasons, and schools have not yet reopened. All of a sudden, every school was scrambling to provide some sort of e-learning. And they were piecing together a patchwork solution of, let's say, Zoom call. Let's say, in addition to Zoom call, they try to find some online resources that they could refer their students to. And so there was almost like a Frankensteinian kind of e-learning product that was created by most schools. And it was a need of the hour. That's how they responded in the first pass. But what the Ryan Group has done, I thought, was very admirable. What they've done is they've gone to Topper, which is an edtech company, and invented an entire new LMS, which is comprehensive and which provides security for children. It provides online learning processes, teaching, learning improvements. Is actually better than what anybody has and what they had earlier. So that is a great example of creating value by studying a situation and actually improving what you do by responding to the situation. So a short-term response would have been, let's just cobble together something and wait for students to come back. But a more strategic response is let's make a better system that can be delivered online, a blended learning system that can help us today, but help students in the future as well. And that, I think, is a great response.
Thank you, Bharat. My last question before I let you go is that, you talked about some professionals that you admired and we all admired in marketing. You talked to Shunu Sen. I remember the first Indian Marketing Awards 17 years back. He was a lifetime achievement winner. His wife and son came to accept that. He was genuinely a lighthouse, if I could use that word. You talked
Brilliant
about Alan
man.
Quincy, again a lighthouse. He had character. Let's put it there. He had, they were all very. They had their own unique ways of being. Now, I want to ask you that you also talked about some brands and your moments of, truth, moments of magic, moments of mystery. But tell us from a brands that have been created in the last 5 years. And I'm saying the brands that have been created in the last 5 years and that you interface with in some way. Give us a couple of brands that you believe follow the tenets, the 9 nuggets broadly that you kind of talk about in your book.
Yeah. I think one of India's a bit more than 5 years, but one of India's recent success stories, I think, Indigo Airlines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I would definitely mention them and I think they speak in a voice which is unique to them. I think they're consistent in their performance. They are very good in their product interface. They have a good sense of service. I find that even though at a time when the crew would thank you for flying Indigo before you disembarked, acknowledging that you had other choices, they would thank you for flying Indigo, so they did not get cocky because they were successful. Think about the sort of the foundation that they have and the work that they do for the planet. I think that's a very admirable brand in my judgment. And then I'd mention a second one, which is like quite far away. It's a much smaller brand, but you said brands that I have personal interaction, which is a brand called Napa Dory. I don't know if you know this brand.
Yeah, I go to the store with my kids.
I
go to the Napa Dory store with my kids. And I also go to the Napa Dory Cafe. So I'm very familiar with the brand.
There you go. So I think that's another very nice Indian brand of recent times. I think, again, on all those parameters of having a clear core, of having a certain design ethos, a certain way of presenting themselves to customers, doing good things, not just in product, but also in the manner they give you service. They have work that they contribute to certain causes. I think when you look at all that comprehensively together, you feel like, okay, this is a brand that I feel has got it right. So those would be 2 examples that I could share with you of brands that I think are doing it right.
Okay, just before I let you go, I just want to say 2 comments. One from Eva Menezes. Hello, Bharat, impressive. Second from Naveen Surapanini. Bharat, very enriching session. It refreshed my fond memories of having many interesting conversations with you while working at Airtel. So these 2 comments. Bharat, if you had to predict 3 trends, I'm not saying make predictions because those are made by astrologers. They're often wrong. But as somebody who built businesses and brands, you did spot some trends early. So tell us, as we go into 2021, what are the top 3 trends that may be small right now, but will become mainstream and big and significant in 2021?
Okay, so one prediction I will make is that Jupiter and Saturn are going to be very close together in the sky on the 21st of December. But jokes apart, I will talk just about 1 or 2 things in answer to that question. See, one thing is that there's this mythical goal of the marketer is to be able to treat every customer as an individual. Any marketer would say, if I could just sit down in front of my customer, I'll be able to persuade him why my brand is right for him, right? We've heard many marketers say this. And that seemingly out of reach mythical goal is actually within reach now, because with data, this idea that you can really get close to your customer is tantalizingly within reach. It's not there yet. The promise is there, but I don't think we are yet at the place where we're doing so much with data. Some brands are doing more. They don't tend to be in our country. They tend to be brands like Spotify and so on, which are doing a lot more. But those are still sort of not quite in the way where you're able to market to each person individually. That's one side of it. The second side of it is then to do that in a mass scale. So it was always possible. You could always talk to one customer, but you could not talk to one customer a million times over, right? So now both those things are tantalizingly within reach. And I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see the promise of treating each customer as an individual convert more into a practice of reaching each customer individually and then massifying that. So I think that's one trend that I think will certainly happen in the next 5 to 10 years. I think the second thing is that I think that the creation of brands will move away from only communication and design. So there seems to be a over dependence on communication and design for brand creation. That is important, but that is only one aspect of brand design. Brand fundamentally are about what do you do to help customers do better in their lives. And I think when brands are more deeply examined for the real value they create, for the real participation that they have in a customer's life, that's when the pendulum will swing away from this over dependence on communication and design. When I talk design, I mean identity design only, and move back to the core of brands, which is about performance and delivery of some real
the basic premise on which they are rested.
I think those are two things.
Thank you, Bharat. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm a student of marketing, and I have been involved in building 2 businesses, and I inherited this venerable brand called Businessworld. I hope I can learn from what you espouse and what you used in your stints in various organizations and with various brands that you've distilled in this book in terms of the 9 nuggets. I would say it's a must read for every young marketer and anybody who's a startup founder who wants to build a business which has a strong brand. And brands build businesses. It's not the other way around.